The Great Script, Carl Jung, and Map of the Soul. Act 1. The Modern Void, the Prison of the Persona. Look at the world we have built. We live in an era of perfect profiles, curated aesthetics, and relentless productivity. We have mapped the physical world down to the last centimeter, yet most of us remain completely lost in the geography of our own souls. There is a quiet underlying roar of anxiety that defines the 21st century. We have more of everything, yet we feel like less of ourselves. Carl Jung, the Swiss visionary, diagnosed this modern sickness long before the invention of the smartphone. He called it a spiritual crisis. He realized that modern man had traded his soul for a persona. In Latin, persona means a mask, the kind worn by ancient actors to project a specific character to a distant audience. Today, your persona is your LinkedIn profile, your professional voice, your polite smile at a dinner party, and the version of yourself you post on Instagram. It is a necessary tool. Without a persona, you would be socially naked, unable to function in a complex society. But the danger, the ultimate psychological trap, is when you begin to believe that you are the mask. Jung warned that identifying with your persona leads to a shallow, brittle existence. When you identify as the successful manager or the perfect mother, you are forced to repress every part of your nature that doesn't fit that narrow description. You become a hollow shell. This is why you feel like an imposter. You are terrified that if the mask slips, people will see the messy, chaotic, and unpolished human being underneath. Consider the character of Arthur Fleck in the movie Joker. He wears a literal mask of paint, forced by his mother and society to put on a happy face. His persona is a clown, a bringer of joy, but underneath is a boiling sea of trauma and rage. The tragedy of the Joker is the total collapse of the persona, where the suppressed contents of the unconscious erupt with volcanic violence. The ego, the center of your conscious mind, is like a small boat on a vast, dark ocean. The persona is the sail you show to other boats, but the ocean itself is the unconscious. Most of us spend our lives desperately trying to keep the boat in shallow water because we are terrified of what swims beneath us. But Jung invites us to dive. He tells us that the meaning of life is not to be found in the safety of the harbor, but in the terrifying depths of the sea. As we move into Act 2, we must ask, what happens to the parts of ourselves we cut off to make the mask fit? Where does our anger, our forbidden desire, and our untapped power go? They don't vanish. They gather in the dark. They become what Jung called the shadow. Act 2. The shadow, the guest we refuse to invite. Everything you have rejected about yourself, everything you were told was bad, wrong, or inappropriate during your upbringing, did not simply disappear. It was pushed into the cold, dark basement of your psyche. This is what Jung famously called the shadow. The shadow is a long tail that we all drag behind us. It is the repository of all the qualities that do not fit into our chosen persona. If you want to understand why you are stuck, why you self-sabotage, or why you feel a sudden, inexplicable rage toward a stranger, you must look at the shadow. The shadow is not necessarily evil. It is simply the unlived life. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to split our souls. To be a good child, you must repress your selfishness. To be a productive citizen, you must repress your laziness. To be polite, you must repress your aggression. By the time we reach adulthood, we have amputated so many parts of ourselves that we are only a fraction of a human being. We are civilized, yes, but we are also hollow and powerless. The most dangerous thing about the shadow is its autonomy. Because it is repressed, it lives a life of its own, beyond the control of the conscious ego. Jung observed that the less the shadow is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. It becomes like a pressure cooker. If you don't find a conscious way to integrate these energies, they will find an unconscious way to manifest, usually through projection. Projection is a psychological sleight of hand. Since the ego cannot bear to look at its own ugliness, it projects those traits onto others. That colleague who annoys you because they are too arrogant, often they are reflecting your own repressed desire for recognition. That politician you hate with a burning, irrational passion, they might be embodying the very shadow qualities that you possess but refuse to acknowledge. As Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Think of the classic story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll is the ultimate persona refined, moral, and respected. But because he refuses to integrate his darker impulses, they take on a monstrous form in Mr. Hyde. The more Jekyll tries to stay pure, the more violent and uncontrollable Hyde becomes. This is a warning for all of us. When a society or an individual tries to be purely good, they create a demon in the basement. To heal, we must perform shadow work. This is not a journey for the faint of heart. It requires the courage to look into the mirror and say, yes, I am capable of greed. I am capable of malice. I am capable of destruction. This admission is the first step toward wholeness. Jung famously stated, I would rather be whole than good. By accepting your capacity for evil, you gain the power to choose good. A person who is incapable of doing harm is not moral. They are just harmless, like a declawed cat. True morality requires having the claws of the shadow and choosing not to use them. In the shadow also lies what Jung called the gold. Your creativity, your passion, and your vitality are often locked away in the same basement as your rage. When you integrate the shadow, you don't just become more dangerous outwardly strong, you become more alive. You reclaim the energy you are using to keep those basement doors shut. As we descend further into the map of the soul, we encounter an even deeper mystery. Once we face our own personal shadow, we meet the inner other, the masculine and feminine forces that define our relationships and our internal balance. This is the realm of the Anima and Animus, which we will explore in Act 3. Act 3. Anima and Animus, the inner other. Have you ever wondered why you fall in love with a specific person? Why does one individual strike you like a lightning bolt, while someone else, who might be perfect on paper, leaves you cold? Carl Jung suggested that when we fall in love, we are not just meeting a person in the outside world. We are encountering a long-lost part of our own soul. He called this the inner other, the anima in men and the animus in women. Jung's theory begins with a radical premise. The human psyche is inherently androgynous. However, as we grow up, society and biology force us to specialize. A boy is taught to be masculine, logical, aggressive, and thick-skinned. In the process, he represses his feminine qualities: intuition, emotional sensitivity, and softness. A girl is often encouraged to develop her feminine side, while her masculine traits, assertiveness, abstract logic, and independent will are pushed into the unconscious. These repressed qualities do not die. They coalesce into an autonomous sub-personality. For a man, this is the anima, the feminine soul. For a woman, this is the animus, the masculine spirit. Because we are unaware of these internal figures, we do what the psyche always does with unconscious content. We project them onto the opposite sex. When a man falls in love at first sight, he is often projecting his anima onto a woman. He doesn't see the real woman. He sees a goddess, a muse, or a mysterious savior. He is intoxicated because he feels for the first time whole. He has found the missing half of his soul, but he has found it outside himself. This is why romantic love is so volatile. When the projection slips, when he realizes the woman is a human being with her own flaws and not the divine anima, the love, often turns into resentment or boredom. The anima and animus act as the bridge to the unconscious. If a man is disconnected from his anima, he may become brutally cold, overly rational, or prone to sudden, irrational emotional outbursts. His anima, living in the dark, becomes poisoned. Similarly, if a woman is disconnected from her animus, she may feel powerless, lacking in direction, or she may find herself possessed by a cold, critical internal voice that tells her she is never good enough. The goal of Jungian psychology is not to stay in this state of projection, but to integrate these forces. This is the sacred marriage. Hyros Gamos. A man must learn to listen to his sensitivity without losing his strength. He must develop his inner woman. A woman must learn to harness her intellectual power and assertiveness without losing her connection to life. She must develop her inner man. Think of the legendary figures in our stories: the king and the queen, the sun and the moon. These are not just external symbols. They are blueprints for your internal balance. In the movie Inception, the character Mal represents the protagonist Dom Cobb's anima. She is beautiful but destructive, a memory he cannot let go of. She haunts his dreams because he hasn't integrated his grief and his guilt. He is literally haunted by his own soul. By integrating the anima or animus, we stop looking for the one to complete us and start becoming the one who is already complete. We stop treating our partners as screens for our projections and start seeing them as they truly are. This is the transition from falling in love to truly loving. But as we cross this bridge of the soul, we realize the map goes even deeper. Beyond the personal figures of our own psyche lies a vast, shared ocean of human experience. This is the realm of the collective unconscious and the archetypes, the ancient blueprints of the human race which we will uncover in Act 4. Act 4, the collective unconscious, the spiritual DNA. If you go deep enough into the ocean of the unconscious, you eventually leave behind the territory of your personal life. You move past your childhood traumas and your private memories. You enter a realm that does not belong to you alone, but to everyone who has ever lived. Carl Jung called this the collective unconscious. While the personal unconscious is made up of experiences you have forgotten or repressed, the collective unconscious is made up of inherited structures. Think of it as the spiritual DNA of humanity. Just as every human body has a heart, lungs, and a brain, every human psyche has a shared set of ancient blueprints. These blueprints are what Jung called archetypes. Archetypes are not ideas or inherited images. They are psychological instincts. They are the empty riverbeds that direct the flow of human experience. We do not learn them from books. We are born with the capacity to experience them. This is why, whether you are in a skyscraper in Tokyo or a village in the Amazon, people dream of the same things: the wise old man, the devouring mother, the hero, and the trickster. Take the hero archetype. Why are we so obsessed with stories like Star Wars, The Lord of the Rings, or the myths of ancient Greece? It is because the hero is an internal blueprint for transformation. When you feel a call to leave your comfort zone and face your fears, the hero archetype is activating within you. You are not just watching a movie. You are participating in a psychic ritual that is as old as the human race. But archetypes have a dark side. Jung warned that we do not have archetypes, archetypes have us. When an archetype is triggered in a large group of people, it can lead to collective madness. This is the root of cults, political fanaticism, and war. When a nation feels lost, it often unconsciously invokes the archetype of the Savior or the Great Father. They project this onto a political leader, giving him God-like power. The result is almost always catastrophic, because no human being can handle the weight of an archetype. Consider the archetype of the wise old man, the sage. In popular culture, this is Gandalf, Dumbledore, or Obi-Wan Kenobi. This archetype represents the wisdom of the unconscious, the part of us that knows the truth even when the ego is confused. When you have a gut feeling that saves you, or a sudden insight that changes your life, you are tapping into the sage archetype. Jung believed that modern man is sick because he has been disconnected from these mythic patterns. We think we are too rational for myths, so we replace them with cheap substitutes: celebrity worship, consumerism, and shallow ideologies. But the archetypes cannot be ignored. If they are not integrated consciously through art, religion, or psychology, they will erupt unconsciously through neurosis and violence. The collective unconscious is a vast library of human potential. To access it is to realize that you are never truly alone. You are carrying the wisdom and the struggles of millions of ancestors within your own mind. The map of the soul is not just a personal map. It is a map of the universe. As we move from the universal patterns of the human race into the practical tools of self-discovery, we enter the most mysterious part of Jung's work, the interpretation of dreams. How does the collective unconscious speak to you tonight? We find out in Act 5. Act 5, the language of dreams, messages from the abyss. Every night, while your body rests, your mind embarks on a journey. You enter a world where logic is twisted, where the dead speak, and where you can fly or drown in an instant. For most people, dreams are just noise or random firing of neurons. But for Carl Jung, a dream was a small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctuary of the soul. Jung's approach to dreams was revolutionary and fundamentally different from his mentor, Sigmund Freud. Freud believed that dreams were disguises for repressed sexual or aggressive desires, a way for the mind to hide the truth from itself. Jung disagreed. He believed that nature does not deceive. A dream doesn't hide the truth. It expresses the truth in the only language the unconscious knows, the language of symbols. Jung introduced the principle of compensation. He believed the psyche is a self-regulating system that always strives for balance. If your conscious ego is too one-sided, your dreams will compensate by showing you the other side. If you are too arrogant and powerful in your waking life, you might dream of being small, naked, or lost. If you are too timid and afraid, your dreams might present you as a warrior or a giant. The dream is the soul's attempt to bring you back to the center, to make you whole. To decode this language, Jung used a method called amplification. Unlike Freud's free association, where you move away from the dream image into personal memories, amplification stays with the image. If you dream of a golden key, we don't just ask what a key reminds you of in your childhood. We ask, what has the golden key meant to humanity throughout history? We look at alchemy, mythology, and folklore. We connect your personal dream to the collective unconscious. There are 4 essential steps to interpreting a Jungian dream. First, the context. Write down the dream exactly as it happened, without judging it. Second, personal associations. What do the specific people or objects in the dream mean to you? A dog in a dream means something different to someone who was bitten as a child than to someone who loves pets. Third, amplification. Finding the archetypal parallels. Is this dream a hero's journey? Is it a death and rebirth motif? Fourth, the synthesis. Asking, what is the unconscious trying to tell me right now? What balance is it trying to restore? Jung also warned that dreams are not just to be analyzed with the cold intellect. They are to be experienced. He practiced active imagination, a technique where you go back into the dream image while awake and engage it in a dialogue. If you see a terrifying shadow in your dream, don't run. In active imagination, you turn around and ask, "Who are you? Why are you following me?" The answer that comes back can change the trajectory of your entire life. By learning the language of dreams, you stop being a victim of fate and start becoming a collaborator with your soul. You begin to see that there is an intelligence within you that is much older and much wiser than your conscious mind. This intelligence is trying to guide you toward your destiny. But this journey into the depths is not without its casualties. To truly understand the map of the soul, Jung had to face his own madness. He had to descend into a darkness so profound that he almost didn't return. This is the story of the Red Book, which we will explore in Act 6. Act 6. The Red Book, The Descent into Hell. In 1913, at the age of 38, Carl Jung found himself at the peak of his professional life. He was a world-renowned psychiatrist, the hand-picked successor to Sigmund Freud, and a man of great social standing. Yet internally he was falling apart. He began to experience terrifying visions and heard voices in his head. He feared he was becoming schizophrenic, but instead of running away from this madness, Jung made a decision that would change the course of psychology forever. He decided to drop himself into the unconscious. This period of Jung's life is known as his confrontation with the unconscious. For several years, he lived a double life. During the day, he saw patients and maintained his family life. But at night, he sat in his study and practiced active imagination, allowing the figures of his inner world to take shape and speak. He recorded these experiences in a massive leather-bound volume known as the Red Book, or Liber Novus, the New Book. Jung's descent was not metaphorical. It was a visceral, terrifying exploration of the basement of the human soul. He encountered figures that felt as real as people on the street. One of the most important was Philemon, an old man with kingfisher wings and the horns of a bull. Philemon became Jung's spiritual guide, a representative of the spirit of the depths. Philemon taught Jung a fundamental truth, that there are things in our psyche that we do not produce, but which produce themselves and have their own life. The Red Book is filled with vibrant, haunting paintings of mandalas, dragons, and cosmic battles. It reveals Jung's struggle between two forces, the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths. The spirit of the times is the voice of logic, science, and material success, everything the modern world values. The spirit of the depths is the voice of the eternal, the mythic, and the irrational. Jung realized that modern man is sick because he has listened only to the spirit of the times and has silenced the ancient soul. This was a dangerous experiment. Jung later admitted that if he hadn't had a family and a medical practice to ground him, he might have been swallowed by the unconscious. But he emerged from this creative illness with the core concepts that define Jungian psychology today: the archetypes, the collective unconscious, and the process of individuation. The Red Book was the prima materia, the raw material for all his later scientific work. For nearly a century, the Red Book was kept in a bank vault, hidden by Jung's heirs. They feared it would damage his reputation as a scientist. It wasn't until 2009 that the world finally saw it. When it was published, it shook the foundations of psychology. It proved that Jung was not just a doctor, but a modern shaman who had traveled to the land of the dead and returned with a map for the living. Jung's message in the Red Book is clear. You are not a machine. You are a part of a cosmic drama. Your neurosis is not a malfunction, but a call from the soul to stop living a fake life and start living your myth. As Jung explored the depths of his own mind, he found strange parallels between his visions and the ancient practices of the alchemists. He realized that the alchemists weren't just trying to turn lead into gold, they were trying to transform the human soul. This brings us to Act 7, the alchemy of the soul. Act 7, the alchemy of the soul, turning lead into spirit. For years, Carl Jung was haunted by the strange symbols he found in medieval texts. To the modern rational mind, alchemy is nothing more than a failed precursor to chemistry, a delusional attempt by prescientific men to turn lead into gold. But Jung had a flash of insight that changed everything. He realized that the alchemists were not talking about metal. They were talking about the human psyche. They were using chemical metaphors to describe the most difficult process in existence, the transformation of the soul. Jung discovered that the stages of the alchemical magnum opus, the great work, perfectly mirrored the stages of psychological growth. The first stage is the nigredo, or the blackening. In alchemy, this is the breaking down of raw material into a dark, chaotic mass. In psychology, this is the dark night of the soul. It is the moment when your persona shatters, when you face your shadow, and when your world falls apart. It is a period of depression, confusion, and grief. But Jung insisted that without the nigredo, there can be no transformation. You must be cooked in the fire of your own suffering before you can be reborn. The second stage is the albedo, or the whitening. After the darkness of the nigredo comes a process of purification. The alchemist washes the material until it becomes silver or white. Psychologically, this is the stage of reflection and cooling down. You begin to differentiate between who you are and what your projections were. You gain clarity. You start to see the archetypes working in your life. This is the dawn after the long night, the birth of a new, more conscious identity. The final stage is the rubedo, or the reasoning. This is the ultimate goal, the creation of the philosopher's stone, or the gold. In Jungian terms, this is individuation. It is the union of opposites, the marriage of the sun and the moon, the conscious and the unconscious, the masculine and the feminine. The result is a person who is no longer split, but one. You become like the alchemical gold, a substance that is incorruptible, stable, and deeply valuable to the world. Jung's fascination with alchemy proved that the human search for meaning is eternal. The ancient alchemist in his lab and the modern person in therapy are doing the same work. They are trying to find the treasure hard to attain, the core of their own being. Jung showed us that our internal chaos is not a mistake. It is the prima materia for our future self. Your pain is the lead that is waiting to be turned into spirit. But as the soul transforms internally, strange things begin to happen in the outside world. Events begin to align in ways that defy logic. This leads us to Jung's most mind-bending discovery, developed alongside Nobel Prize-winning physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Act 8. Synchronicity. Act 8. Synchronicity, the bridge between mind and matter. Have you ever thought of an old friend you haven't seen in years only to have them call you 5 minutes later? Or perhaps you were struggling with a profound life question, and suddenly the lyrics of a random song on the radio gave you the exact answer you needed? Most people dismiss these as mere coincidences, but Carl Jung believed they were signs of a deeper underlying order in the universe. He called this phenomenon synchronicity. Jung defined synchronicity as a causal connecting principle. In our daily lives, we operate under the law of causality, cause and effect. If you kick a ball, it moves. The kick causes the movement. But synchronicity describes events that are connected by meaning, not by cause. There is no physical reason why your friend called at the exact moment you thought of them. Yet the two events are perfectly aligned in time and significance. The most famous example from Jung's own practice involved a young woman who was psychologically inaccessible because she was too rational. During a session, she described a dream in which someone gave her a golden scarab, an expensive piece of jewelry. At that exact moment, Jung heard a tapping on the window. He opened it and caught a real scarabid beetle, a golden-green rose chafer, which is the closest thing to a golden scarab in that climate. He handed it to her and said, "Here is your scarab." This shattered her rational defenses and allowed her therapy to begin. Jung's interest in synchronicity was deepened through his intense friendship with Wolfgang Pauli, one of the fathers of quantum mechanics. Pauli was haunted by strange phenomena in his own life. Scientific equipment would often break just by him entering a room, a joke known as the Pauli effect. Together, the psychologist and the physicist began to suspect that the world of mind and the world of matter were actually two sides of the same coin. They called this underlying unity the unus mundus, the one world. This theory suggests that the universe is not just a cold machine of matter and energy. It is a living, symbolic system. When you are on the right path or when you are at a major turning point, the universe winks at you through synchronicity. These events are not meant to be proven statistically. They are meant to be felt personally. They are the moments where the spirit of the depths breaks through into the spirit of the times. Synchronicity teaches us that we are deeply embedded in the fabric of reality. Your internal thoughts and the external world are communicating. To live a Jungian life is to be attentive to these meaningful coincidences. They act as signposts on the journey of individuation. They tell you that you are not an isolated ego floating in a meaningless void, but a vital part of a meaningful whole. But what is the ultimate destination of this journey? If we integrate the shadow, balance the anima, listen to our dreams, and follow the signs of synchronicity, where do we end up? We arrive at the core of the map. Act 9, Individuation and the Self. Act 9. Individuation, the birth of the true self. We have traveled through the dark basement of the shadow, crossed the bridge of the anima, and sailed the vast ocean of the collective unconscious. Now we arrive at the center of the map. Jung called the destination of this journey individuation. It is the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual, a separate, indivisible unity or whole. Individuation is not about becoming perfect or better than others. It is about becoming who you were always meant to be. Most people spend their entire lives living as a fragment. They are merely a collection of social roles, childhood traumas, and repressed impulses. They are divided against themselves. Individuation is the act of gathering all these scattered fragments and bringing them into a single harmonious center. This center is what Jung called the self. While the ego is the center of your conscious mind, the self is the center of your entire psych-conscious and unconscious combined. The self is the God within us, the organizing principle of our existence. The journey of individuation usually begins with a crisis, often in midlife. Jung observed that the first half of life is dedicated to the ego, getting an education, starting a career, finding a partner, and building a persona. This is necessary. But in the second half of life, the soul demands something more. The achievements that once gave you joy now feel hollow. This midlife crisis is actually a call from the self, demanding that you stop performing for society and start listening to your own inner truth. To reach the self, you must endure what Jung called the union of opposites, conjunctio. You must hold the tension between your light and your dark, your reason and your intuition, your masculinity and your femininity. You don't fix your flaws. You integrate them. As Jung famously said, "I would rather be whole than good." A good person is someone who hides their darkness to please others. A whole person is someone who has looked into their own abyss, accepted their capacity for evil, and yet chooses to act with integrity. Individuation is a lonely path. It often requires you to go against the spirit of the times and the expectations of your family and peers. Jung noted that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But this privilege comes at a high price, the death of your old, fake self. It is the death and rebirth motif that we see in every great myth and religion. You must lose your life to find it. Symbols of the self often appear in dreams as mandalas, perfectly balanced geometric shapes, or as figures of divine authority. When you begin to align with the self, a strange sense of peace settles over you. You are no longer driven by the opinions of the world. You have found your inner compass. You realize that you are not just a random accident of biology, but a unique expression of the universe itself. Individuation does not mean you become selfish or isolated. On the contrary, only a person who has found their true self can truly relate to others. When you stop projecting your shadow and anima onto people, you can finally see them as they are. You become a pillar of strength for your community, not because you are trying to be a hero, but because you are operating from a place of unshakable authenticity. The map of the soul is now complete, but a map is useless unless you use it to navigate. As we reach the final act, we must look at how to apply Jung's wisdom to the modern world and your personal life. This is Act 10, The Return, Living the Myth. Act 10, The Return, Living Your Myth in a Disenchanted World. We have reached the end of the map, but for you, the journey is only beginning. Carl Jung did not leave us these theories so that we could become scholars of his books. He left them so that we could become masters of our own lives. The final stage of the hero's journey is the return. You must take the elixir of wisdom you have found in the depths and bring it back to the mundane world of bills, social media, and daily chores. The modern world is disenchanted. We have replaced the gods with algorithms and the soul with consumerism. We have gained the world, but lost our meaning. Jung's challenge to us is to re-enchant our lives. This doesn't mean believing in literal fairy tales, but recognizing that every one of us is living out a myth, whether we know it or not. If you don't choose your myth, you will be lived by an unconscious one often, a tragic one inherited from your ancestors or forced upon you by society. So how do you live a Jungian life in the 21st century? First, own your shadow. Stop looking for villains in the outside world. Every time you feel a surge of irrational hatred toward someone, look in the mirror. Ask yourself, what part of me is that person expressing? When you stop projecting, you stop being a victim. You reclaim the energy you've been wasting on judgment and turn it into personal power. Second, listen to your internal messengers. Your dreams are not junk mail. They are personalized letters from the universe. Keep a dream journal. Talk to your inner figures through active imagination. If you feel a deep, nagging dissatisfaction despite your success, don't medicate it away. Immediately listen to it. It is the self trying to get your attention. It is the spirit of the depths reminding you that you have a destiny to fulfill. Third, pay attention to synchronicity. Live with your eyes open. The universe is more mysterious than our science currently admits. When meaningful coincidences happen, acknowledge them. They are signposts telling you that your inner world and the outer world are in alignment. They are reminders that you are part of a vast, interconnected web of meaning. Jung's work teaches us that the greatest adventure is not found in space or across the oceans, but within. He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakes. The world doesn't need more people who are good in a superficial way. It needs people who are whole. It needs individuals who have faced their darkness and integrated their light. As you turn off this screen, remember the map. You have an ego, but you are not just an ego. You have a persona, but you are not the mask. You have a shadow, but it is the source of your gold. You have a soul, and it is older than the stars. Go out and live your myth. Become the hero of your own story. Because, as Jung believed, the salvation of the world starts with the transformation of a single individual. It starts with you. Thank you for traveling this path with me. The abyss is no longer scary when you have a map. Now go explore.